The whispers sliced through the warm Virginia air like a blade. Ezra stood at the edge of the wedding reception, his heart pounding so loud it drowned out the string quartet. He could feel the weight of 100 eyes on him, judging, dissecting, mocking the lilt in his voice that he'd never learned to hide. He'd known coming back to Richmond for his brother Nathan's wedding would be a gamble. 5 years had passed since he'd last seen his family, since the shouting match that left his mother in tears and his father slamming the door behind him. But Nathan's hesitant invitation, scrawled in a card that arrived at Ezra's Brooklyn apartment, had carried a fragile hope. Maybe we can start over. Ezra had clung to that hope, even as Leo, his partner, warned him about the family's old wounds. Now, standing among relatives who barely acknowledged him, he felt that hope fraying. "Sounds like he's still, you know," a cousin muttered nearby, her voice dripping with disdain. Ezra's cheeks burned. His gay voice, as they called it, had always been their favorite weapon. Too soft, too expressive, too much. He'd spent his teenage years trying to deepen it, to flatten the melody that seemed to betray him. But it never worked. His voice was his, woven into his soul like the curls that fell across his forehead. And Leo loved it. Loved the way Ezra's words danced, the way they carried his heart into every syllable. Leo's hand found his, a quiet anchor in the storm. "You don't have to stay," he whispered, his hazel eyes fierce with protectiveness. Leo, with his sharp jawline and quiet strength, had a way of making Ezra feel like he could face anything. But this was a battlefield Ezra wasn't sure he could cross. "I have to," Ezra said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For Nathan. For me." The reception was in full swing now, the garden strung with fairy lights that glowed against the dusk. Nathan, tall and broad-shouldered in his tuxedo, stood with his bride, Claire, under a wooden arch draped in white roses. They looked perfect, like a postcard of Southern charm. But Ezra saw the tension in Nathan's jaw, the way his eyes darted toward him and then away. Nathan had been the golden child, star quarterback, law school graduate, the son who never disappointed. Ezra, with his theater dreams and unapologetic queerness, had always been the outlier. The MC's voice crackled through the microphone, announcing the toasts. Ezra's stomach twisted. He'd agreed to say a few words, a gesture to mend a rift with Nathan. But as he stepped toward the mic, a sharp laugh cut through the crowd. "Oh, this'll be good," his uncle muttered, loud enough for half the tent to hear. "Let's hear that voice." Ezra froze. The words stung, reopening scars he thought had healed. Leo squeezed his hand harder, his eyes blazing. "You've got this," he said low and steady. Ezra took a breath, his heart hammering, and stepped up to the microphone. "Hi, everyone," he began, his voice trembling but clear. The crowd quieted, some out of curiosity, others out of pity. "I'm Ezra, Nathan's little brother. It's been a while." A few awkward chuckles rippled through the tent. He could feel his mother's eyes on him, her face unreadable. His father, sitting at the head table, stared at his plate. "I wasn't sure I'd be here today," Ezra continued, his voice gaining strength. "Nathan and I, we haven't always seen eye to eye. But love is why we're here. Love is what brought Nathan and Claire together, and it's what brought me back to this family, even when it was hard." He paused, his gaze finding Nathan's. For a moment, his brother's eyes softened, and Ezra felt a flicker of the bond they'd once shared. Late nights, sneaking cookies, building forts in the backyard. But then his uncle snorted, muttering something about fairies, and the moment shattered. Ezra's hand shook. He could walk away now, let the whispers win, or he could fight. He thought of Leo, of the nights they'd spent singing in their tiny apartment, of the songs Ezra had written but never shared. Music had always been his refuge, his way of speaking truths he couldn't say aloud. Maybe it was time to let his family hear it. "I was going to give a toast," Ezra said, his voice steady now, "but I think I'll sing instead." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nathan's brow furrowed, and Claire's smile faltered. Ezra's mother leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. Leo gave him a nod, his eyes shining with pride. Ezra took a deep breath and began to sing. His voice, that gave voice they mocked, filled the tent with a melody raw and haunting. It was a song he'd written for Leo, about love that fought through fear, about finding home in someone's heart. The notes soared, unapologetic, carrying every piece of him, his pain, his hope, his love. The crowd fell silent. His uncle's smirk faded. His mother's eyes glistened with tears. And Nathan looked at him like he was seeing him for the first time. As the last note faded, the tent was still. Then Leo clapped, loud and deliberate, and the sound broke the spell. A few others joined, then more, until the applause swelled. Ezra's heart raced, not with fear now, but with something new, something like belonging. Nathan stood, his face unreadable, and walked toward Ezra. The crowd watched, breathless. Ezra braced himself, unsure if his brother would embrace him or turn away. But Nathan stopped in front of him, his eyes searching Ezra's face. "I didn't know," Nathan said, his voice thick. "I didn't know you could sing like that." Ezra swallowed, his throat tight. "You never listened." Nathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Ezra thought he'd walk away. But then Nathan pulled him into a hug, fierce and unexpected. "I'm listening now," he whispered. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Ezra barely heard them. He clung to his brother, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in years, he felt like he was home. But the night wasn't over, and the family's wounds ran deep. As Ezra stepped back, he saw his father's chair was empty. His heart sank. Not everyone was ready to listen. The reception buzzed with renewed energy, the clink of glasses and laughter filling the air. Ezra stood by the dessert table, still reeling from Nathan's embrace. His brother's words, "I'm listening now," echoed in his mind, fragile but heavy with promise. Leo's hand rested on his shoulder, a steady warmth that grounded him. Yet the empty chair where his father had sat gnawed at Ezra's heart, a reminder that not all bridges could be mended in one night. Nathan returned to Claire's side, his smile softer now, less guarded. Ezra watched them, wondering if this was the start of something new or just a fleeting moment of grace. He wanted to believe in the former, but the sting of his father's absence was sharp. Leo leaned in, his voice low. "You were incredible up there. You know that, right?" Ezra managed a small smile. "I just wanted them to see me. Really see me." "They did," Leo said, his eyes fierce with conviction. "And they'll never unsee it." But not everyone was swayed. As Ezra moved through the crowd, he caught snippets of conversation, some warm, others cold. His cousin Lila approached, her expression hesitant. "That was beautiful, Ezra," she said, her voice genuine but tinged with awkwardness. "I didn't know you could sing like that." "Thanks," Ezra replied, his tone cautious. Lila had been one of the kinder ones growing up, but she'd never stood up for him when the others mocked him. Her compliment felt like a step, but a small one. Before he could say more, a sharp voice cut through. "Still showing off, huh?" It was his uncle, Greg, leaning against the table with a glass of bourbon in hand. His smirk was back, sharper now, as if Ezra's song had challenged his worldview and lost. "You always did love the spotlight." Ezra's chest tightened. He could feel Leo tense beside him, ready to fire back, but Ezra touched his arm lightly. "I'm not here to fight, Uncle Greg," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I just wanted to be here for Nathan." Greg snorted. "Right, for Nathan. Not to make a scene." "That's enough." Nathan's voice cut in, firm and unexpected. He'd appeared behind Ezra, his posture rigid. "This is my wedding, Greg. If you can't respect my brother, you can leave." The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. Greg's face reddened, but he said nothing, turning away with a muttered curse. Ezra stared at Nathan, stunned. His brother had never defended him before. Not when they were kids, not when their father's disapproval drove Ezra away. Nathan met his gaze, his expression a mix of guilt and resolve. I meant what I said, he murmured. I'm listening now. Ezra nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He wanted to believe Nathan, but years of silence couldn't be undone in a single night. Still, the fact that Nathan had stood up for him, even in front of family, was a crack in the wall that had separated them. As the night wore on, Ezra and Leo found a quiet corner near the garden's edge. The fairy lights cast a soft glow, and the distant hum of music felt like a cocoon. Leo pulled Ezra close, his lips brushing against his temple. "You're braver than you know," he whispered. Ezra leaned into him, letting the warmth of Leo's embrace ease the ache in his chest. "I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop." Leo chuckled softly. "Maybe it won't. Maybe this is the start of something better." Ezra wanted to believe him, but the memory of his father's empty chair loomed large. He hadn't seen his dad since the song, and the absence felt like a judgment. Growing up, his father had been the loudest critic of his gay voice, his theater dreams, his everything. Ezra had spent years trying to earn his approval, only to realize it might never come. As if summoned by the thought, his mother appeared, her face pale but determined. "Ezra," she said softly, her hands twisting together. "Can we talk?" Ezra's heart sank. His mother, Ellen, had always been caught in the middle, loving her sons but unable to challenge her husband's rigidity. He nodded, and Leo gave his hand a reassuring squeeze before stepping away. Ellen led him to a bench under an oak tree, its branches heavy with Spanish moss. "Your song," she began, her voice trembling. "It was beautiful. I didn't know you felt all that." Ezra looked at her, searching her eyes for the mother who used to read him bedtime stories, who'd once promised to always protect him. "I've always felt it, Mom. I just stopped trying to explain it to you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I should have done more. When you left, I didn't know how to fix it." Ezra's chest ached. He wanted to be angry, to demand why she hadn't fought for him. But seeing her now, fragile and earnest, he felt only sadness. "I'm here now," he said quietly. "That's something, right?" She reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "It's everything." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of years between them. Ezra wanted to ask about his father, but the words stuck in his throat. Before he could find them, Claire approached, her smile warm but tentative. "Ezra, that song. It's going to stay with me forever." "Thank you." Ezra managed to nod, his emotions raw. Claire hesitated, then added, "Nathan's been talking about you all night. He's proud of you, you know." The words hit Ezra like a wave. Proud. He couldn't remember the last time anyone in his family had said that. But as he looked across the garden, he saw his father standing alone by the bar, his face unreadable. The night was far from over, and Ezra knew the hardest conversations were still to come. The night deepened, the Virginia sky now a canvas of stars above the glowing garden. Ezra stood with his mother, her hand still clutching his, as if afraid he'd slip away again. Her words, "It's everything," lingered a fragile bridge between them. But across the reception, his father's solitary figure by the bar cast a shadow over the moment. Ezra's heart thudded, torn between hope and the old, familiar dread. Leo returned, his presence a quiet strength. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning Ezra's face. Ezra nodded, though his stomach churned. "I need to talk to him," he said, glancing at his father. "I can't leave without trying." Leo's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I'll be right here." Ezra took a deep breath and crossed the garden, each step heavier than the last. His father, Richard, stood with a glass of whiskey, his broad shoulders hunched. He'd always been a towering figure in Ezra's life, stern, unyielding, the kind of man who valued discipline over emotion. Growing up, Ezra had craved his approval, but every attempt to connect had ended in silence or criticism. The gay voice, jabs had started with him, cutting deeper than anyone else's. "Dad," Ezra said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. Richard looked up, his gray eyes guarded. "Ezra." His tone was flat, unreadable. He took a sip of his drink, the ice clinking in the glass. Ezra waited for more, but nothing came. The silence stretched, heavy with years of unspoken words. Finally, he pressed forward. I saw you leave during my song. I need to know why. Richard's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Ezra thought he'd turn away. But then he set his glass down, his movements deliberate. It was a lot, he said gruffly. Your voice, the song. It's not what I expected. Ezra's heart sank. Not what I expected. The same old disappointment, dressed up in different words. What did you expect, Dad? That I'd come back and be someone else? Richard's eyes flickered, something like guilt passing through them. I don't know, Ezra. I thought maybe you'd changed. The words stung, but Ezra refused to flinch. I haven't changed. I'm still me. The same kid who loved singing, who wanted you to be proud of him. But you never were. Richard looked away, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It's not that simple. Then explain it, Ezra said, his voice rising. A few heads turned, but he didn't care. Explain why you can't look at me without seeing something wrong. Why you left tonight when I was finally honest. Richard's hands clenched, and for a moment, Ezra braced for anger. But instead, his father's shoulders sagged. I didn't leave because of you, he said quietly. I left because I didn't know how to feel. That song, it hit me hard, made me think about things I've been avoiding. Ezra blinked, caught off guard. His father wasn't one for vulnerability. This was new, unsteady ground. What things? He asked, his voice softer now. Richard hesitated, then met Ezra's eyes. You, Nathan, this family. I made mistakes, Ezra. I know that, but I don't know how to fix them. The admission was small, but it cracked something open in Ezra's chest. He'd spent years imagining this moment, but it wasn't the clean resolution he'd hoped for. It was messy, raw, real. You could start by listening, he said. Really listening. Richard nodded slowly, his expression unreadable but softer than before. I'm trying. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was something. Ezra felt a weight lift just slightly. He glanced back at Leo, who was watching from a distance, his eyes full of quiet encouragement. Nathan approached, Claire at his side, and the air shifted again. Everything okay? Nathan asked, his voice cautious but warm. Ezra nodded, his throat tight. Getting there. Claire smiled, her eyes bright. Your song was the highlight of the night, Ezra. People are still talking about it. Nathan chuckled, a sound Ezra hadn't heard in years. She's right. You stole the show, little brother. The words warmed Ezra, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the night was a tightrope. One wrong step, and it could all unravel. As the band struck up a new song, Nathan extended a hand. Dance with us. Ezra hesitated, then glanced at Leo, who grinned. Go on, Leo said. I'll join in a minute. Ezra let Nathan pull him onto the dance floor, where Claire and a few cousins were swaying to the music. For a moment, it felt like the old days, before the fights, before the silence. Nathan's laugh was infectious, and Ezra found himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time all night. But as the song ended, Ezra caught sight of his Uncle Greg watching from the sidelines, his expression dark. The warmth in Ezra's chest cooled. Not everyone was ready to let go of their grudges. And as he looked at his father, now sitting alone again, Ezra knew the hardest work was still ahead. The night spun on, a delicate balance of hope and tension. Ezra danced, laughed, and held Leo's hand, but the weight of his family's history pressed against him. He'd opened their hearts with his song, but keeping them open would take more than music. The dance floor pulsed with laughter and music, but Ezra's eyes kept drifting to his father's solitary figure. Richard sat at the edge of the reception, his whiskey glass untouched now, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Ezra's heart tugged, half hope, half fear. His father's words, I'm trying, echoed in his mind, but they felt like a promise made of glass, fragile and unclear. Leo slid an arm around Ezra's waist, pulling him close as the band shifted to a slower melody. You're overthinking, Leo murmured, his lips brushing Ezra's ear. One step at a time, okay? Ezra nodded, leaning into Leo's warmth. I just want him to see me, not the version he wants me to be. He will, Leo said, his voice steady. You showed him who you are tonight. That's enough for now. But Ezra wasn't sure it was. He glanced at Nathan, who was twirling Claire under the fairy lights, their laughter bright and unburdened. Ezra envied that ease, the way Nathan seemed to fit so seamlessly into the family's expectations. Even now, after standing up for Ezra, Nathan moved through the crowd with a confidence Ezra had never known. As the song ended, Ezra's mother approached again, her smile tentative but warm. You two look good together, she said, glancing at Leo. It was the first time she'd acknowledged their relationship directly, and Ezra's heart skipped. Thanks, Mom, he said, his voice soft. Leo squeezed his hand, a silent thank you. Ellen hesitated, then added, Your father. He's struggling, Ezra. He doesn't know how to say it, but he's proud of you. He just doesn't know how to show it. Ezra's throat tightened. Did he say that? Not in so many words, she admitted, her eyes flickering with sadness. But I know him. That song shook him. Give him time. Time. Ezra had given his family years, and it hadn't been enough. But tonight felt different, like the ground was shifting beneath them all. He nodded, unable to find the words to respond. The reception moved into its final hours, the crowd thinning as guests said their goodbyes. Ezra and Leo helped stack chairs, a small gesture to feel useful. Nathan joined them, his tie loosened, his face flushed from dancing. You sticking around tomorrow? He asked Ezra, his tone casual but hopeful. Ezra hesitated. He and Leo had planned to drive back to Brooklyn at dawn, eager to escape the weight of Richmond. But Nathan's question held an invitation, a chance to keep this fragile connection alive. Maybe, Ezra said, if you're up for breakfast or something. Nathan grinned. Deal. Claire makes a mean pancake. For a moment, it felt like they were kids again, planning a lazy Sunday morning. But the moment was interrupted by a sharp voice. Ezra, you got a minute? It was Greg, his uncle, standing with a few other relatives near the bar. His tone was gruff, his eyes narrowed. Ezra's stomach knotted. He glanced at Leo, who gave a subtle nod, his expression wary. Sure, Ezra said, forcing his voice to stay even. Greg led him to a quieter corner, away from the music. The other relatives, 2 cousins and an aunt, stood with crossed arms, their faces a mix of curiosity and disapproval. Look, Greg began, his voice low but sharp. That stunt you pulled with the song? It was a lot. People are here for Nathan and Claire, not your performance. Ezra's blood ran hot. It wasn't a stunt. It was for Nathan. And for me. Greg scoffed. You always make it about you. That voice, the way you act, it's embarrassing. Always has been. The words hit like a slap, but Ezra stood taller. Embarrassing to who? You? Because I'm not ashamed of who I am. Greg's face reddened, but before he could respond, Nathan appeared, his expression dark. That's enough, Greg, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You don't get to talk to my brother like that. Not here. Not ever. The relatives shifted uncomfortably, and Greg muttered something under his breath before stalking off. Ezra's heart pounded, a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. Nathan turned to him, his eyes fierce. I'm sorry, Ezra. I should have shut that down years ago. Ezra swallowed hard, his emotions raw. You're doing it now. That's what matters. Nathan nodded, his jaw tight. We're not done talking, you and me. Tomorrow, okay? Ezra nodded, a flicker of hope reigniting. As Nathan walked back to Claire, Ezra felt Leo's hand slip into his. You okay? Leo asked, his voice soft. I think so, Ezra said, though his heart was still racing. He glanced at his father, still sitting alone, and made a decision. Tomorrow, he'd try again. For Nathan, for his mother, for himself. The night had cracked his family open, but the real work of healing was just beginning. The garden was nearly empty now, the fairy lights casting long shadows across the grass. Ezra stood with Leo, the weight of the night settling into his bones. His confrontation with Greg still burned, but Nathan's defense had left a warmth that lingered. Across the lawn, his father remained, a silent figure under the oak tree, his face unreadable in the dim light. Ezra's heart tugged, urging him to close the distance, but fear held him back. Leo squeezed his hand. "You don't have to do this tonight," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You've already done so much." Ezra shook his head. "If I don't try now, I'll regret it." He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and walked toward his father. Richard looked up as Ezra approached, his expression guarded but not hostile. "You're still here," he said, his voice gruff but softer than before. "Yeah," Ezra replied, sitting on the bench beside him. "I didn't want to leave without talking." Richard nodded, his eyes on the ground. The silence stretched, heavy with years of distance. Ezra's mind raced, searching for the right words. He'd spent so long angry at his father, but now, sitting here, he felt only a deep, aching need to be understood. "Your song," Richard said finally, his voice low. "It reminded me of your mother. She used to sing like that, back when we were young. Full of feeling." Ezra's breath caught. His father rarely spoke of the past, let alone with such tenderness. "I didn't know that," he said. Richard's lips twitched, almost a smile. "You got that from her, not me." Ezra swallowed, his throat tight. "I always thought you hated it. My voice the way I am." Richard's face tightened, and for a moment, Ezra braced for rejection. But his father sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't hate it. I didn't understand it. Still don't, not really. But tonight, I saw you. Really saw you." The words were small, but they cracked Ezra's heart open. He blinked back tears, his voice trembling. "I just wanted you to be proud of me, Dad. Even a little." Richard looked at him, his eyes glistening in the low light. "I am," he said, the words rough but sincere. "I haven't shown it, and that's on me. But I'm proud of you, Ezra." Ezra's chest ached, a mix of relief and disbelief. He'd waited his whole life for those words, and now they felt both too big and not enough. "Why didn't you ever say it?" he asked, his voice breaking. Richard looked away, his hands clenching. "I didn't know how. I thought, if I push you to be different, stronger, you'd be okay. But I push you away instead." Ezra nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. "You did, but I'm still here." Richard reached out, his hand hesitant, and rested it on Ezra's shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a lifeline. "I don't want to lose you again," he said quietly. Ezra placed his hand over his father's, his heart pounding. "You won't. But we've got work to do." Richard nodded, his grip tightening briefly before he let go. "Yeah, we do." As Ezra stood, he felt lighter, like a weight he'd carried for years had begun to lift. He glanced back at Leo, who was watching with a soft smile, and felt a surge of gratitude. Leo had been his rock, his home, through all of this. He walked back to him, their hands finding each other instinctively. "You okay?" Leo asked, his voice warm. "Better than okay," Ezra said, his smile shaky but real. I think we're going to be all right." The night wound down, and Ezra and Leo helped Nathan and Claire with the last of the cleanup. Nathan clapped Ezra on the back, his grin wide. "Breakfast tomorrow, right?" "No backing out." Ezra laughed, the sound freer than it had been all night. "Wouldn't dream of it." As they drove back to their hotel, the Virginia countryside dark and quiet around them, Ezra leaned his head against the window, Leo's hand resting on his knee. The night had been a storm, painful, raw, but cleansing. His family wasn't whole yet, but the cracks were starting to fill with something new. Hope, maybe, or love. Tomorrow they'd talk more. Nathan, his mother, his father, they'd all try, in their own messy ways, to rebuild what had been broken. And Ezra, with Leo by his side, felt ready to meet them halfway. The morning sun filtered through the hotel curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. Ezra sat on the edge of the bed, his fingers tracing the rim of a coffee mug. Last night's events felt like a dream, Nathan's embrace, his mother's tears, his father's quiet admission. "I'm proud of you." The words still echoed, fragile but real. Leo stirred beside him, his hair tousled, his smile sleepy but warm. "Ready for pancakes?" he asked, his voice teasing. Ezra laughed softly, ready for whatever comes next. They drove to Nathan and Claire's house, a cozy brick home on the outskirts of Richmond. The air was crisp, scented with dew and blooming jasmine. Ezra's nerves hummed, but Leo's hand in his kept him steady. This breakfast wasn't just about food. It was about testing the fragile bridges built last night. Nathan greeted them at the door, his grin wide and unguarded. "You made it," he said, pulling Ezra into a quick hug. Claire appeared behind him, her apron dusted with flour, her smile welcoming. "Hope you're hungry," she said, leading them to a sunlit kitchen. The table was set with stacks of pancakes, fresh fruit, and coffee that filled the air with warmth. Ezra's mother was already there, her eyes brighter than last night. To Ezra's surprise, his father sat at the head of the table, his posture stiff but his presence undeniable. Richard gave a small nod as Ezra entered, a gesture that carried more weight than words. They ate. The conversation light at first, Claire's wedding stories, Nathan's bad jokes. But as the plates cleared, the air grew heavier, expectant. Nathan leaned back, his eyes on Ezra. "Last night was big," he said. "Your song, man. It got to me." Ezra's heart skipped. Yeah, Nathan said, his voice soft. "Made me realize how much I missed you. I should have reached out sooner." Ezra swallowed, his emotions raw. "I missed you too. I just didn't know if you wanted me around." Nathan's face fell. "I always did. I was just too caught up in my own life to show it." Claire reached for Nathan's hand, her smile encouraging. "We're here now," she said. "That's what counts." Ezra glanced at his father, whose silence was deafening. Richard's eyes were on his coffee, but Ezra could tell he was listening. "Dad," Ezra said, his voice steady but gentle, "what about you? Where do we go from here?" Richard looked up, his expression a mix of guilt and resolve. "I don't have all the answers," he said, "but I meant what I said last night. I want to try. For you. For this family." Ezra's mother reached for Richard's hand, her eyes glistening. "We both do," she said. "We've lost too much time already." The words were a balm, soothing wounds Ezra had carried for years. He looked at Leo, whose quiet smile said everything. "I'm here. I'm proud. I love you." Ezra took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Okay," he said. "Let's try." The conversation shifted to lighter things, plans for a family barbecue, Ezra's theater work in Brooklyn, Leo's graphic design projects. For the first time, Ezra felt like he was part of the family, not just a guest. Even his father asked questions, halting but genuine, about Ezra's life. As they finished, Nathan pulled Ezra aside. "I want you to come back," he said. "Not just for holidays. Anytime. Bring Leo. Let's be brothers again." Ezra's throat tightened. "I'd like that." They hugged longer this time, and Ezra felt something settle in his chest, a sense of home he'd thought was lost forever. As he and Leo drove back to the hotel, the road stretching out under a wide blue sky, Ezra felt lighter than he had in years. The family wasn't perfect, and the road ahead would be messy. But they were trying, and that was enough. Back in their room, Ezra pulled Leo close, his lips finding Leo's in a soft, lingering kiss. "Thank you," he whispered, "for being with me through this." Leo smiled, his eyes warm. "Always." The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Ezra felt ready to face it, with his family, with Leo, with his voice unapologetically his own. The Richmond skyline faded in the rearview mirror as Ezra and Leo drove north toward Brooklyn. The road hummed beneath them, a steady rhythm that matched the quiet hope in Ezra's heart. Last night's wedding and this morning's breakfast had changed something fundamental, not just in his family, but in him. His voice, once a source of shame, had become a bridge, fragile but real, connecting him to the people he'd thought he'd lost. Leo reached for his hand, his fingers warm and familiar. "You're quiet," he said, glancing over with a teasing smile. "Plotting your next big performance?" Ezra laughed, the sound light and free. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just processing." "Fair," Leo said. "That was a hell of a weekend." Ezra nodded, his mind replaying the moments that had defined it. His song, Nathan's hug, his father's halting confession, his mother's tears. They weren't a perfect family, not by a long shot. But they were trying, and that was more than Ezra had dared to hope for. Back in Brooklyn, their apartment felt like a sanctuary. The familiar clutter, Leo's sketchbooks, Ezra's sheet music scattered across the table, grounded him. He sat at the piano, his fingers tracing the keys, and began to play. The melody was new, born from the weekend's raw emotions. It wasn't just for Leo this time, but for his family, for himself. Leo joined him, sitting close, his shoulder brushing Ezra's. "New song?" he asked. "Yeah," Ezra said, his voice soft. "About home. About us." As he played, the notes filled the small space, carrying the weight of everything he'd felt: pain, hope, love. His voice joined in, unapologetic and true, the gay voice that had once been a wound, now a badge of courage. Leo listened, his eyes shining, and when the song ended, he pulled Ezra into a kiss, deep and fierce. "You're incredible," Leo whispered. "You know that, right?" Ezra smiled, his heart full. "I'm starting to believe it." Weeks later, an email from Nathan arrived, inviting Ezra and Leo to a family barbecue in Richmond. Attached was a photo from the wedding. Ezra at the microphone, his face alight with passion, Nathan and Claire watching with tears in their eyes. Even his father, in the background, looked moved, his expression softer than Ezra had ever seen. Ezra showed the photo to Leo, his throat tight. "They're trying," he said. "They really are." Leo wrapped an arm around him. "And so are you. That's what makes this work." Ezra nodded, his eyes on the photo. The road ahead would be long, with stumbles and setbacks. His Uncle Greg and others like him might never come around. But Nathan, Claire, his mother, even his father, they were reaching out, and Ezra was ready to meet them halfway. He thought of his song, the one that had cracked his family open. It hadn't erased the past, but it had built a new foundation, one where his voice, his true, unfiltered voice, could be heard. And as he looked at Leo, at the life they'd built together, Ezra knew he'd never silence that voice again. The barbecue was a month away, a chance to keep building, to keep singing. Ezra closed the laptop, his heart steady. He'd go back to Richmond, not as the outlier, but as a son, a brother, a man who'd found his place. And when he sang again, it would be for all of them, for the family they were becoming, one note at a time.